Welcome to this episode of the Cloudsourcing Storytelling Podcast. Host Julian Mitchell will be connecting you with guests from a wide range of different media genres and platforms. In today's episode, the panel is discussing cloud-based media delivery technologies that are used by sports clubs in a world where they've needed to become media companies in their own right. Guests include Tom Bassam, the editor of Sports Pro Media, and Mark Wood, Production Solutions Director at Pulse Live. Welcome to the Cloudsourcing Storytelling Podcast.
Hi there. Welcome to another episode of the SONY podcast. Today we are talking about sports brands who become media companies and how they project themselves to their fans, to their customers. We wanted to start off with maybe some of the more well-known examples of this in Europe and the States, and maybe talking about the NBA and the NFL and just catching up with how they're doing this thing that we describe, how they're becoming media companies.
Yeah, I think the two examples you mentioned there, Julian, are really strong ones. Both the NFL and the NBA in the last year really spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into thinking about how they can be like public-facing media brands as well as selling their rights for billions of dollars. The NBA, for example, relaunched their app last year, which is now it's an incredible app actually. If you open it up, it is kind of almost a social media platform in and of itself. It features like lots of the viral clips that you tend to see on your Instagram feed or your TikTok feed or on Twitter or X, these days, but built into that as well as the ability to stream games, and that's like that works across mobile and smart TV, and it's kind of probably the best example I think so far of like what an OTT and over the top service can be, because it does exactly kind of that. It goes over the top. It gives you everything that a super fan might want, and that's kind of really, I think, the point at this stage for those big rights holders is to be serving that super fan with these kind of products. So it offers them, kind of the content to keep them engaged between games, but also when their teams are on, it has that ability and the tech support actually, and the kind of technical ability to show those games in a pretty high quality. And the NFL, again, like another similar example, they've gone a bit more down the mobile focus route to start with, but actually for the start of this season, NFL Plus, which they launched last year, and that's now also showing live games for fans in market. So it's not national, but it is in market, and it has the ability to do that, and that's also across smart TV and mobile. So I think it's no real surprise that the US is a leader here. I think when it comes to those kind of big properties and engaging their fans. But yeah, I think those are two very strong examples of the way in which this media landscape is going.
Is this a subscription or part of a subscription?
So there's kind of it's a bit flexy. So there's different tiers for sure. The NBA app, for example, you can open up for free, but if you want to get the league pass element of that, you have to pay for it. But within that, they'll also offer mini payments for games as well. So yeah, there's kind of lots of different access points that. While there's certainly a paid element, it's the idea is to kind of have that broad top of funnel where you get some things for free, and then the more costlier the content on offer, that's when you start paying for it.
Okay, and Mark, do you see this app route as something happening in Europe, or maybe some Premiership clubs, or even big clubs like Barcelona we mentioned when we talked before? Is that a route that America is showing the other clubs how to do it?
I think that's a really good question, actually. I think maybe in some areas with mobile applications, the European clubs might actually be slightly ahead of America. They have a much broader proposition. It tends to be that the individual clubs will have the rights to make sure that they are developing their applications in the way that they want to and having that relationship with the fans that they want to. I think the structure between the American leagues and the European leagues is quite different in terms of who owns the rights to build websites and mobile apps, with American leagues tending to collectively bargain and then present their teams with options that they can then use. Whereas in Europe, we're finding that it's generally the clubs that then have the rights to do whatever they want to do. Therefore, bigger clubs with much bigger budgets can go much further. And then the smaller clubs may enter into something that's more of a collective agreement that suits them and their budgets.
And as a customer, perhaps the American model is better, because then you don't have so many multiple apps that you have to use.
Yeah, it can be. I think you're still going to get a fan-facing app for your team. So, most people tend to only be a fan of one or two teams at most. So you're not really getting that many more applications. And it's an interesting point where that collective power, the rising tide lifts all ships. Everybody gets a better application, but it does make it harder for the bigger teams and the teams that want to invest into this to stand out from the crowd a lot more.
Tell us what some of your customers are doing in that space. Is it Barcelona, Liverpool?
Yes, yeah, we work with Barcelona. So Barcelona focus very much on both web and mobile, and really driving home a lot of their multilingual content, really trying to support their very large global fan base. They are really, really heavily into A/B testing. A lot of what they're doing, they really try to experiment, and they're trying to innovate every opportunity. Video is a massive proposition for them, and one of the things that they are really starting to branch out is to say, well, actually, we're not just a football club, we're a sports club. So they will promote their basketball team, they'll promote their handball teams. Their women's team is one of the best in the world, and they will try to give that exposure and that fandom, that access to all of the fans for all of the sports that they're producing. And then as they start to think about that way of how can they gain more fans, about becoming more of a brand, things like branching out into things like Lego. They have a partnership there. They have all sorts of other partnerships that are not just directly tied to the sport, but are ways of bringing new fans into the Barcelona family.
Something recently with Inter Miami has maybe broken the mold slightly with what they're doing with Messi. Tom, do you know much about the relationship that Apple has with Inter Miami and what's happening there?
Oh yeah, so I mean, it's a really interesting example, and I think probably there's only one or two players in the world in any sport that could probably get this kind of agreement. It's not been officially confirmed anywhere, I don't think, like exactly what the relationship entails, but there's a part of the agreement to bring Messi to MLS and for him to sign for Inter Miami. There was talks of the fact that he will get a part of some of the revenue that's generated from sales of MLS Season Pass, which is basically the OTT product that Major League Soccer launched this year with Apple. It's a global deal. Basically means that Apple TV carries like every single MLS game everywhere in the world. And given that the arrival of Messi has spiked massive interest in the league, I think like, for his debut alone, they signed up 100,000 new subscribers. So, I mean, you can kind of see the impact that he has, and that's factored into that agreement. There's also other things that go into that as well. So, like, there's other Messi documentaries and content being produced by Apple. He has a separate agreement with them, but it's kind of part of that broader package to bring him to MLS. He is one of the very few players in the world that benefits from a league rights deal. The equivalent, I guess, for here would be if someone was to say, okay, right, Erling Haaland is now going to get an X percentage of the Premier League's domestic rights because he's driving interest in such a massive way. I mean, it wouldn't happen, but it makes sense in MLS when you're signing such a marquee player like that, I think.
Maybe some of the NBA players might have that kind of reach and power, but it's hard to think of many others, isn't it?
Yeah, no, certainly. given the shelf life of an athlete, it's very, very impressive. And I don't know, actually. I mean, I don't know if it's a model that we'll see replicated in many other places. To be honest, it is almost unique, I think.
Coming up to the Rugby World Cup, I know, Mark, your company is involved with that package. Could you break down what's available at the moment and how it's going, if you've had any feedback?
In terms of what we're building, we're building the official Rugby World Cup website and the mobile application. So sort of the primary destination for rugby fans to actually go and find any information they need about the World Cup. I was taking a look through the site this morning, and the thing that really stands out for me at the moment is full match highlights for every single game. Some of these then get locked behind a registration wall, but it's all free. So it's a great way for World Rugby to learn more about who their rugby fans are, and to have that initial relationship with them, which they can then turn into more of an ongoing relationship. The other things that are really then helping to drive that insight are some of the games and the interactive elements to that. So there's a match predictor where you can try to guess the outcome of any match. And as ever, a very popular fantasy game as well, where you can compete with your friends to show just who knows the most about rugby and get your bragging points. In terms of the feedback, I think everybody's incredibly pleased with how things are going.
Yeah.
We're seeing lots of uptake, both in terms of number of downloads of the apps. Tournament apps are always incredibly popular, a really great asset to any tournament situation, giving people that ability to find out what's happening at every single point in the tournament, especially with something like a World Cup where there are so many games happening every single day. The tournament's been structured so that there are no games happening concurrently, and therefore the odds of you being able to watch as many games as you might like, it's just not really feasible. So people returning to these apps for that information. I think one other thing that's really quite interesting there is World Rugby have a little while ago now purchased the Rugby Pass website, so that as a governing body they have to remain very neutral, and they can't really show any bias or any favoritism towards any one team. They're there for the sport and for the tournament. But by buying a separate media company, they can now start to have a more an outlet for things that are much more creative, that can commiserate with fans when things don't go their way. They can cheer on players when they're doing really well, and they can have a bit more of an interesting voice that the fans are also looking for.
And what's the life of something like the site you've built? Obviously, you go beyond at the end or the final, but what's built into that for fans?
The Rugby World Cup website is a destination for fans to be able to go to find out about any World Cup. So once we move out of a tournament mode, we'll quickly move into more of a living archive, and then we will start to then talk about the road to the next World Cup qualification, and the process of actually getting to the next World Cup is actually does genuinely take a long time. And there's obviously international rugby happening all the time, so that will also then factor into that engagement. There's obviously a massive drop off in engagement for these tournament sites that live every 4 years, and it's all about continually building that relationship back up in the run up to those tournaments.
We wanted to end on what I think Mark termed as beyond video, which is the kind of social media, shared games type thing, and maybe talk about what's there at the moment and what's coming potentially. Obviously, at the moment, social media, shared games are options that are there. What kind of state are they in? Is this something that's playable now, or?
I think some of the more interesting stuff is being done by UFC at the moment. So they have an agreement with Meta to which essentially means that they will broadcast some of their live fights in VR in Meta's X Stadium and Horizon Worlds, like digital environments, which are sort of I mean, like, trying to describe metaverse is tough at the best of times, but essentially it's a virtual reality world, which allows you to kind of interact with the people around you and what's in front of you. So it's almost like you're kind of being taken into an arena while sat wearing a VR headset, which I think is it's an interesting development. I still, I'm not entirely convinced that people in the future will be wanting to sit sit watching like live sport wearing a VR headset, especially given it's kind of quite a shared experience anyway, quite a lot of the time. But it still kind of says where this is going, which is that like connectivity, right? It's the kind of part of sport. I mean, if you can provide that in a digital environment, then that's certainly something that people are going to explore until it kind of is proved to work or not work. They're not the only ones doing it. The WNBA are kind of doing similar things too, as are kind of handful of sports properties. But yeah, I think that watching in different worlds, and Roblox is another platform which is offering that kind of thing. That will be something that I think gets explored by sports properties, especially the more kind of adventurous ones in the next few years when it comes to this kind of stuff.
So Roblox is a metaverse type thing.
Yeah, Roblox is. I mean, it's like, it looks like a kid's game, but it's a virtual world in which your avatar, you can walk around it, and there's different. Like, for example, each of the tennis Grand Slams has a Roblox experience. Like, they don't offer live viewing in that yet, but it's not completely out of the question. And it's just kind of basically kind of provides maybe for older generations, I think like Second Life was probably a good old example of this, or something similar. But yeah, it's allows you to kind of take yourself out of your front room and go into somewhere else, and offer that live viewing experience in a different way.
And Mark, what do you see coming up? What's your company kind of looking at as future investment, maybe, or a future area you can work in?
Yes, I think actually that the Roblox example there is a really apt one. Sony Sports, it's something that we've been investing into and working in. And a great example there would be taking the Hawkeye skeletal tracking data that is used for some forms of officiating, and therefore mind-bogglingly accurate, to then actually port that into the Roblox world. And I think that was something that was done for the FIFA World Cup last year, giving children a way of engaging with something which is both enormously fun just to interact with, but also then very accurate, giving them all the highlights and the clips in a way in a format that is effectively bringing that content to them rather than asking you them to come to you. Great way of then driving engagement and interaction with that particular event. We're seeing examples with clubs like Manchester City, where they are starting to think about their own metaverse, and something where they are working with a team within Sony to build a metaverse where it's just for the fans, but instead of having something which is trying to be too dry, they're actually thinking about how they can build AI personalities into that system, which are truly driven by that sort of feeling of you're talking to a fan, and you're talking to a fan that knows a huge amount about the club, and then you can actually have an interesting interaction with that personality. Obviously, there's still a huge amount of work and a long way to go to bring these systems into common use. It's still very much a little bit like talking to your Alexa, in that it's not quite as natural as it would like to be at the moment. But these sorts of technologies are improving every day. I don't think it's going to be too long before that sort of ability to inject a personality into any sort of conversation that you've got, where you can ask it questions, you can get it to give you an opinion, is all going to be something that's quite normal. I would agree with Tom that I think wearing a headset to watch a match is probably not going to take off. I think that social aspect of sitting down on a sofa and watching a game together is always going to be something that is hard to beat.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see kids wanting to converse with maybe an avatar of Haaland, for instance, something like that. I mean, in that way, that it's like, collecting cards way back when. It's the modern version, maybe.
Yeah, and I think it's a really great point to make. I think we've seen a bit of a rise and a fall of NFTs, but the idea behind being able to collect digital items and those sorts of microtransactions, different rarities, that's not going to go away. It's whether it's just a collection of pixels or not, it's so much fun to start building a collection and to be able to show it off and talk about it with your friends. And it's those little mini dopamine hits that everybody loves.
More for that. Fascinating stuff. Absolutely. And thanks both of you for joining us, and goodbye from us. Thanks a lot.